be a good thing or a very bad thing for the chess. We'll see.
If it helps, I feel like exhausted too.
Yeah, I was trying to take a nap at like 8 o'clock tonight and it wasn't happening. It's okay. Oh. Are we sharing the chat?
Oh, that's my job. Yes. Oh. Yeah. Hello. Hello, Farzan. Hello, West. Hello, Chrysol. Hello, Coney Mars Chess. Rachel's muted. Oh, shoot. Can you guys hear everyone? Can everyone say something?
Hello, hello, hello.
Chrysol finally got into the win column in the Dojo Classical Tourney today. Still muted. God, I hate this. I hate it here. That's a me problem. But I don't. Rachel, how do you get it to do the audio?
I just have the. It's the beta thing, the application audio capture, and then I just
as a separate source.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think I'm just gonna do it the way.
But I don't have my desktop audio though. So it could maybe.
No, neither do I.
Yeah, I just have it as a separate source, and then you just like link the Chrome page.
Okay, I think I'm just gonna do it this way. Chat, can everyone hear?
We've got one person who says they can hear us.
Okay, great. Hey, Walker. Hello, Prod Kevin.
Might depend which stream they're watching on.
Yeah, I just have it as a separate source, and then you just like link the Chrome.
Okay. Shall we start?
Yes.
Yeah, seems like we're ready. Okay, excellent. All right. Welcome, everybody. Blood Queen and Rach Angel, most of all. Anushka and Rachel, thank you for being here once again to make yourselves better at chess and give everyone else a chance to improve along with you. This is the 6th episode that we have done already of Endgame Sparring in this new version with me pretending to be a teacher. And I've got something new and different for you today. I've been trying to come up with like a cool theme every week so far. So today we're going to have an endgame position that's quite a bit different. And my first question for the two of you about this position is going to be, how simple versus complicated does it look, right? Because I've given you some endgame positions that were actually move as early as move 15 of an opening, right? With two rooks, multiple minor pieces on the board, you know, a king in the center, and it wasn't even 100% clear is it an endgame or is the king being threatened. And 1 week I gave you something relatively simpler with king and pawn endgames, right? And a lot of other times I've given you combined pieces. So here I'm giving you a pure rook endgame. And before I ask you, is white better, is black better, is it a draw, is it a win, or anything like that, I'm just curious, does this position strike you as simple or complicated? We'll start with Anushka.
Okay. I feel like the bait answer is that it's simple because it's just, you know, rook and three pawns versus rook and three pawns. But rook endgames are where chess starts. I love rook endgames, so I wouldn't say it's still very complicated. Every chess position is complicated.
Every chess, okay. Some of the king and pawn endings were not that complicated for you all.
That's fair. King and pawn endgames. Yeah, if it's theoretical and there's like an algorithm, I guess it's not so complicated.
Yeah.
But yeah, this seems like it would be hard to push for a win for both sides. But yeah, and I'd say it's a draw, but most rook endgames are draws.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
So Anushka's saying basically this should still be pretty interesting and somewhat complicated. I think partly, you're rebelling against the idea that a position that's equal or a position that's simple or something like that wouldn't be fun or interesting, right? So you're saying, oh, this still looks appetizing. Rachel, how complicated does this position look to you?
Definitely more complicated than it would be if the pawns were on the same side. Yeah, just the fact that the kings are on opposite sides, the pawns are on opposite sides. I know in a tournament game I've had 3 pawns versus a rook, and that's super interesting.
With no other pieces, like one side only had
With
the
no other
rooks,
pieces.
one side only had the pawns. Oh, cool.
And that was super interesting. So like, I think that this is just, makes it even more complicated than that. Feels definitely like a race of some kind, and yeah, I've never played anything like this before. So
yeah. Okay, good point.
It looks pretty interesting.
So we'll ask Anushka as well. Anushka, have you had any endgame that Rachel correctly called this a race endgame, right? A position where one side is much stronger, one side of the board than the other side. Have you ever had an endgame of this style where you had a big advantage on one side of the board in the endgame, and the opponent had a big advantage on the other side?
I'm trying to think of an example if I did. I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't have like a whole lot of games in my arsenal, but all the games that I can think of that went to endgames usually are like IQP, like pass pawns.
Yeah. Here, I'm going to give you a thought experiment. We're going to place a couple pawns. Everyone else can try and follow along. We'll put a white pawn on d5, a black pawn on d6, and I'm going to highlight the squares to make it a little bit easier, folks. And a black pawn on a6, and then a white.
Wait, we're not in a classroom, are we? Sorry.
No, sorry.
We're like all okay.
Sorry, I skipped that step.
No, it's okay.
I thought this was a visualization exercise.
It is now.
Okay, you might need to repeat that one more time.
Okay. Do you have the fen? Do you have the position that we're playing today as a starting point?
And
All right. So we're going to imagine a white pawn on d5.
Okay.
And black pawns at d6 and a6.
Okay.
And then we'll give white like a pawn on h2.
Okay.
So we're adding 2 pawns for each side.
Yeah.
Now, if you imagine that pawn structure, that's the kind of position that you can sort of get out of a Najdorf Sicilian. So a lot of the times, the places that race endgames come out of are middle games with opposite side castling, because each side like throws all their pawns at the opponent's king and maybe sacrifices them to open up lines, right? But if for some reason you sack all your pawns, your opponent sacks all their pawns, and just as that happens, there's some combination that trades pieces, then suddenly you're like, oh, now I've got all these passed pawns because you tried to attack my king, and they've got all those passed pawns because you tried to attack their king. And then you get into race endgames, often out of those kind of Sicilians and other opposite side castling positions.
Okay.
So, yeah, if you can sort of visualize those extra pawns on the board, you can maybe feel, certainly Anushka who plays the Najdorf, you can maybe feel how, that actually could come out of like a Sicilian kind of structure.
English attack.
Yeah, exactly. English attack. So, very good. So we're gonna, we're gonna play this position, and we'll try it at least once with white, once with black, and I'm gonna give you a caution that I've given you before, but I feel like is helpful somewhat to you, which is, I don't like to spoil things too much in advance, but just be gentle on yourselves, okay? Whoever loses the first game, don't get demoralized for the second game. all right? Because there's a fair chance that one of you is going to lose the first game. And then you're going to say, what? It was like 3 versus 3. How did I lose? I must have blundered something. But I want you to play the second game normally.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. That's the best advice I can give here. And yeah, go ahead and start the game whenever you get a challenge ready.
Okay. I can send a challenge. We're doing 2 plus 30?
2 plus 30.
Okay. Nope. 2 plus 30. Okay. Should I go first as white or should Rachel go first as white? Does it matter?
It doesn't matter. You can go either way.
I'll play as black first. Oh, fuck. Wait, sorry. I did the thing.
That always happens. You like put it in, it resets at 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And chat,
Why?
while they're setting up the game, I'm just going to mention about my advice about not getting upset before the second game. I mean, even in a tournament, it's not conducive to your next round to get upset about a previous round, right? Probably most of you are aware of that in theory, right? But then even more so when you're in training, to get upset and down on yourself in a sparring session when you're supposed to play, 4 games back and forth with an opponent, it is really, really not good for you, a squandering of your training time if you just get upset and don't play normally. It was possible for Rachel to blunder mate in 1 on the first move, and that would have hopefully gotten them like laughing instead of upset, and you like get over like, okay, we can make blunders and now let's play normally. But some people would get very upset if they did that and then have trouble playing a normal sparring session afterwards. So, all right, I'm going to mute myself over there and give my unfiltered comments over here on my channel. So they start off, Rachel has a very important choice on the very first move between avoiding the back rank mate by running her king towards the opponent's pawns, right? Or just starting to push her own pawns. And even if she wants to run her own pawns, she's got an important choice between run the A pawn that's furthest away from the king or run the C pawn that creates a different diagonal for her king to get into the center of the board. And there's a tactical detail as well already with the C pawn, which is that if your C pawn gets to C7, you've got a threat of rook to D8, which does not exist with the A pawn. So the C pawn has a certain tactical resource on its own that's already different than the A pawn. That's already going on from the very, very first move. But of course, they can try a couple different approaches during sparring, and we'll see what, you can learn from the first few games. Like in the first game, you can't guess whether you should be moving your A pawn or your B pawn, Okay, so here we see a move, rook e5 from Blood Queen. She decides to use the rook to challenge white's pawn rather than racing onward with her pawns, right? And there's a crazy difficult choice to be made at almost every move in these race endgames, which is, do I race to outrace my opponent, right? Or do I race to outrace them, or do I need to start playing defensive moves to slow down their queening, right? It's a very, very hard choice to make on every move, and it often demands some crazy calculation. We've got our first kind of mistake, I think, of our match today, which is this rook e5 move. The idea was to attack the pawn, and if it advances, get behind it. But this is essentially refuted by rook a3, because if rooks trade now, the A pawn is just too far ahead of the G pawn, right? The race will be won by white. So that's going to be a quick resignation, which is perfectly fine. They didn't expect it, but I did.
I could play out that position, but I feel like it wouldn't be helpful.
Right, very good. You can get more games, right? And I think as we do this, you're both naturally going to get better at extracting the most value per minute from your sparring sessions, right? So first of all, there's no point agonizing on the first move for 2 minutes. Should I move my A pawn or my B pawn, right? You just try it and you find out, right? And some of these choices, you just try them out. And then if something clearly goes wrong, resign more quickly, start another game and use a different strategy, right? So like rook e5 to a5 seems to be a mistake. We learn something from it, and then we just play another game, right? And you might be able to get in 8 games instead of 2. So it's good.
Yeah.
Okay. Should I rematch? Or I send a whole new challenge?
Does the rematch switch the colors, or?
No, not when we do it like this, right?
Okay.
So
Yeah, I don't mind playing the same. I mean, yeah, I don't really see the difference between the colors, so I'm happy to. Yeah.
This is actually a position where it doesn't matter too much to switch colors each game. Actually, yeah.
We'll just do rematch.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Bye.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good point. Usually, folks, in sparring, it's very important to switch colors between games, so you see both sides of it. But here, both sides are very, very close to being the same. Yeah. So hopefully that loss from that first game doesn't throw Anushka off her game at all, and she keeps playing normally here. She does have to remember to play that first move in 30 seconds or so before chess.com aborts her. Made it. Okay. Nice. But yeah, as Song and Dance is saying in chat, you can learn from your mistakes and move on without dwelling on it, and we can get in more reps this way as well. So super, super useful. Rachel has no reason not to play a5 again here, right? And then Anushka can just play a different defense. Instead of rook e5, we might see her play rook a8, or we might see her just try to race with h5 or f5 here. Rook a8 invites the move b4. I don't know to what extent that slows white down. So here she's going for it with a racing move. And now, on a6, then your pawns are really separated. So on a6, you're really asking for rook a8 with a question of, what are you up to, white, right? The pawn gets too far away. So here, plausible moves for white include maybe b4, rook to d5, and king c1, right? You could start bringing the king in that direction. You could bring a second pawn, or you could see if your rook can find some chinks in their pawns, right? Kind of like what Anushka did the first game when she played rook e5. Now, I've found from practicing this position a little bit that king c1, king d2 is pretty useless as long as the opponent's rook is on e8. So if something happens in the game that makes your opponent's rook move off of the e-file, then it becomes a major theme to run your king towards those pawns. But if you spend your tempi playing moves like king c1, king d1, two tempi to not even threaten to cross the e-file, their rook will not have to move away to deal with your pawns because you'll be 2 steps behind the race, right? So they'll just run their pawns and your king will be useless on d2. So one of my first thoughts or takeaways on this position is you don't want to start with the king race into the middle. You need to start by racing one of your pawns before your king. Okay, here comes that rook a8 move, trying to freeze the pawns. b4. Rachel invested quite a bit in this idea of cutting the black king off with her rook. But now the question is, who's going to stop this pawn from queening, right? If she played rook d5, d7, whatever this maneuver was, and then she ends up just going rook d1 pretty soon, it won't be successful, right? She won't really have slowed the black king at all. So let's see how she handles this. if h3 got played next, that's what she has to think about. If h3 got played next, and then she played rook d3, with the idea of h2, you can catch the pawn from h3. Right, like so. H3, rook d3, g4 will actually be losing for white, pretty much, right? I mean, the pawns just keep going. Very close to losing. So, okay, she goes for c4. And this h3 move looks very, very strong at the moment. My guess, some minor instinct I built up, my guess is that black's winning here with h3. I don't think this rook maneuver from white is working. There comes h3.
David, did Papa get dinner?
No. Yeah, so rook d3, g4 doesn't even help white at all. So white's looking at either rook h2, rook d2, sorry, or rook to d1 are kind of the two main ideas here. And then if black plays g4, you might have to play rook h1 to freeze the pawns, kind of like the black rook on a8. But that'll be so many moves that rook has done. You'd think that white would be a little bit behind in the race. Would they be? Yes, because this pawn would have to be at a6 and this pawn at b5 for that to be an equal point in the race. Yeah. So white's going to be quite a bit behind here. You still think this should be close to equality, Lipschitz, or you mean originally it should have been close to equality? I mean, I believe that the original position is close to equality, but I believe this position is probably winning for black. Could be wrong, but that's my guess here. Decides to activate the king. Interesting strategy. I thought she could just go with her pawns here. That was my feeling at the moment. That she could just push the g-pawn and, you know, force white to prove that they had a way to stop these pawns. There comes the c-pawn. So I think the idea for Rachel is to get the pawn further up the board. And once it's further up the board, you can push the b-pawn and black doesn't have time to take here. But that's going to be a lot of pawn pushes. Interesting, Blood Queen moved the king in one direction towards her pawns. She didn't hedge with like king f7 heading in two directions. The famous king ability pointed out by Reti. Like if you want to support your pawn on g4, but maybe also deal with their c-pawn, right? Then you could bring your king on this diagonal in both directions. Rook over to h8. So she wants to go h2, h1. This, I think, is not a good technique because in many cases white can just sack the rook for the pawn. It's so important which side queens first, because these pawns are going to be unstoppable in a moment. Interesting question, which pawn Rachel should push here, but I would assume she should push a pawn. I'm leaning towards starting to calculate like b5, h2, king c2. Sorry, the arrows are just not working at all on chess.com today. h1, rook h1, rook h1, b6. I think the a pawn's just as good as well. I don't think actually it makes a huge difference which pawn she moved here. And honestly, I thinking about it, I don't think she even needed to play rook h1, right? Or even king c2. I think maybe just a7. And then your opponent plays h1, you take, they take with check, you move your king, they have to play rook back to h8, and then you go b5, g4, b6, g3, b7, g2, you queen, they queen. Very, very close, actually. Not yet clear that either side's winning. See how it goes. Now, rook h1 is, you know, lining up for this g3, g2 to come in. You see that as they play a few quick moves here and there, they do get the chance to really calculate on a few of the moves. Rook h1. I mean, a single move can go from winning to losing here, actually. So, the first question I asked them, how complicated is this position? If we look at the starting position for a second, how complicated it is, the answer is insanely, extremely complicated. It's one of the most difficult positions, if not the most difficult position that I've given them yet in any of these episodes, even though it looks like it's just one rook against one rook, and I've given them positions with lots more pieces on the board. But, at some point these pawns get somewhat down the board, and then the calculations become devilish. Like, they become so difficult that no humans can really manage them, I think. So, what happened? Black won by resignation after g4. Okay. Interesting. So Rachel felt like Black was winning here.
Hello.
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 Okay.
I think I'm going to change my strategy for the next one. Didn't work too well.
Okay, we were just wondering if Black was winning after g4. Didn't really know yet.
Oh, really?
But I guess you thought it was very clear, huh?
I mean, like, I didn't g3, g2, and I didn't see anything to do. I was thinking, like, even rook takes h2, and then, like, I'm just one tempo short. And my pawn was on a7, and then it's okay, I think.
If your pawn were on a7, you could play rook h2, and you're probably winning. Yeah. But...
Yeah. I was thinking if it was on a7, rook h2, but then I was like, okay, yeah. If I have to play a7, and then you go back to rook h8, and I don't think I have any... Oh, maybe that's interesting still, actually.
Anushka, had you expected resignation here, or did you think there was still a fight going on?
I didn't expect resignation. I did think I was better, but I was kind of waiting to be proven wrong.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, looking at it, it looks like there's maybe still a complicated variation that might start a7, g3, and then move the king off the back rank, with the idea that you could answer g2 with rook takes h2, and maybe that's complicated, at least to a human.
So you're saying, like, a7, g3, and then
king b2 or c2.
And then, like, king b2, and then g2 takes take. Oh, interesting.
Takes on h2 with the idea if they queen, you take on h8. And if they take your rook, you queen, and then they queen. So first you think, like, oh, they're just up. Oh, but they queen with check from the rook. Oh.
Yeah. Unfortunate.
Oh, so it's not complicated anymore.
I mean, but I didn't see any of that, so... But I didn't even see that as a follow-up. It was hard because I think with this time control, for some reason, every single... Like, it's saying I'm about to abort every single move, like, pretty much up until the end. Which...
I think once you've played 2 moves, it won't abort you anymore.
Yeah, that's how it usually is, but... I wanted to think longer and, like, come up with a plan and then just kind of, play faster once I had an idea of what was going on, and then it would just tell me that I was going to abort.
Oh, it was giving you the warning message.
Yeah, like 5, 6 moves into.
That's really annoying.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that game was very interesting. It had several phases where I was like, oh, I think this person's better, that person's better, I don't know what's happening. But I guess at the end, you're probably right. The Black's winning.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's a cool variation.
I didn't see the...
It's a cool variation.
The rook takes h2 is a cool, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you guys want to just keep banging a few more out?
Sure. I wanted to ask, like, my king isn't doing anything, and it almost feels like it should be, but I don't, like, it doesn't need to walk up with the pawns, because it would be faster and, like, more, I don't know, better to just, like, walk up 2 pawns together if I need protection. And I can't really, like, walk over to get the other side pawns because of their rook's cutting me off. So it's just, like, my king is, like, in the way.
Yeah, I didn't realize when you played king g7, it was just because you wanted to use the rook, not even to use the king on the next move.
Yeah.
Yeah, so far the kings haven't really offered much. And it seems like both of you are in agreement on that, right? Neither of you has moved the king much, so I don't think Rachel sees something really useful for the kings to do. immediately, which is very rare for an endgame, right? Very rare.
Yeah, it feels wrong.
A lot of endgames, you'd maybe put your rook on an open file and then centralize your king. And here you're like pushing some pawns and then starting to calculate weird scrambly variations.
Yeah.
Cool. Should we rematch same color?
Yeah.
All right, game 3. So we're getting in more reps today compared to some other days. I've given them the 30 seconds so they have more time to think on the moves they play, because I know that these games are going to last 5 to 15 moves, not 40 moves, right? Somebody's going to queen and it's going to be over. It's not going to be lengthy king maneuvering. It's not going to be, looking for a Zugzwang, trying to pass the move to the other person. They always want to move in this endgame versus, a lot of endgames you oddly try to force your opponent to move to give way for you. In my opinion, calculation is a huge piece of the skills needed here. On the first few moves, it's still uncalculable, right? You can't sit on the first move and calculate c4, g5, c5, rook c8, b4, h5. Like, you can't calculate it from the start. So you have to have some kind of ideas or principles for the first few moves. Maybe wedded to a couple basic little calculations, like, before you move a pawn too far ahead of the other pawns, you just check, can my opponent attack it? Do I have a way to defend it? Some stuff like that, right? But you have to somehow play the first few moves off of some concepts of, should I be using my king or my pawns or my rook? Which pawn should I advance first? Some stuff like that, right? And then you hit a phase where you just need to calculate like mad. All right, so that c-pawn's coming way ahead of the others, and Rachel's building up a little bit of time, so she's playing a few moves on instinct here, preparing to calculate later. I assume that in case of rook c8, she's planning to play rook c3, right? And then try to just get the b-pawn all the way. Now she, for the first time in our games, has threatened this concept of rook d8. You see, in the previous games, she's always pushed the a-pawn first, I think. Maybe she played a4, then b4, then c4. This is her first time using this c-pawn, so it's our first time seeing this concept of, seeing that little boost from that threat of rook d8. So Anushka has to play rook c8. Rook c3 comes in. Now she can consider, running this pawn, looking to trade pawns. She can consider bringing her king over to this pawn now that her king's not cut off. Or she could consider running the h-pawn versus the b-pawn. It feels like the b-pawn is going to get a nice tempo at b7, but there is a check on h1 and there's no check on c8. So probably everything is conceivable, yeah? So the very first thing I would calculate here as black is, can I win this pawn by just running my king over? So I'd go king f6, b4. I'm just saying this, you all can try and follow this as a visualization. So king f6, b4, king e6, b5, king d6, b6. Did black get there in time to capture that pawn? No. So that line is out. Once the pawn's on b6, whatever you do, white's going to play b7 later, right? So then the second line I would calculate would be the move that Anushka ended up playing. I would calculate h5, b4, h4, b5, h3, b6, h2, b7, h1 equals queen, and I can take on b7 and win. And then that would cause me to keep looking at h5 a little bit more, As white, is it time to run the king to the king side here? Good question, Lipschitz. So we could calculate king c2, h4, king d2, h3, king e2, h2, rook c1, rook takes c7, and it looks like black's winning. So I'm not sure what white's supposed to do at this point. The basic variations are all losing for white at the moment, seemingly. Both just a plain running of the king to, e2, f2 loses, and a plain running the pawn to b7 loses. So white's going to need something funky in here, you know, a move like rook c4 or rook c1 at the right time. Let's say white goes b5, h3, b6, h2, maybe then rook c1, right? Yeah, that makes sense. That's a line for white. It's a mix of trying to win on the queen side and trying to slow down the king side. So we go b6 so black doesn't have rook takes c7. And then we put our rook on c1 to stop h1. And then you're into calculating lines like g3, b7, rook takes c7, b8 equals queen, rook takes c1, and stuff like that. That's going to be tricky. It's going to be tricky. I can imagine a very interesting variation at this point, which goes as follows. b6, h2, rook c1, g3, king b2, g2, b7, rook takes c7, rook takes c7, queens, 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 rook g8 check, and white probably gives mate with queen and rook against two queens. Certainly there's no way white's bad in that position. They're probably going to find the first couple of those moves. I think we're definitely going to see b6, h2, rook c1, I think. For a player over 16, 1700, you only have so many options at this point. It's starting to feel like, oh, well, if I play b7, h1's check, I mean, there's only so many options here. They can't, but there are going to be some tricky moves coming up in a couple moves. So, like, let's say black plays g3 here. That's a moment where white has to think, right? Are we playing rook h1? Are we playing b7? Are we playing my move king b2, which I think is better and definitely tricky. That seems good for white, Lipschitz. And my concern with your line where you're playing b7 with the king on b1 is that black can play rook takes c7. That's why I think white needs the move king b2 here instead of your move b7. I think b7 rook c7 is not so good because that h-pawn is going to queen with check. It's not 100% inconceivable. Like, sometimes you can play something like b7, rook c7, h1, queen check, king b2, and the opponent can't win. Because to stop that pawn from queening, they need to play something like queen h8, but you have rook c8. Sometimes there are sort of surprise miracle lines, but Rachel could check that line for a bit if she's desperate. But I think king b2 looks much clearer to me here. Okay, she goes for b7. So Anushka's going to take. Will Rachel react like she blundered something? If Rachel blunders at any point in the session, she can point out it's midnight. Also, I gave them a position that's just brutal. You just have to make lots of mistakes on both sides. I think everyone's gradually coming to the same conclusion that, oh my goodness, this is complicated. Yeah. So Rachel goes for taking it. I don't know if this was her plan, but it's not impossible for this to work out. Black's going to queen. Then maybe check on g2. Check on f3. Try and get the queen centralized. If she can get centralized, then eventually she'll be threatening to win this rook with a fork. With a double attack on the king. If she can get into the open board. Anushka's thinking quite a long time for a move like queening a pawn with check, right? That's how complicated the position is, you know. And I'm not saying it because she's wrong to think, right? I'm saying it because it's unusual that it would be right to think like this on such a move. The odds are that there's some way for black to win Lipschitz. Yeah, like if we had to guess, if we didn't have to find good moves, all we had to do was guess the evaluation, we would guess that black's winning. But would we find the winning variation for black in a game, right? Playing off this kind of 30-second increment, right? Where every move you get the chance to calculate for 30 seconds, maybe a minute if one of your moves was forced. That's what we're really looking at, right? Is the practical skills. And that's one of the two reasons that I've given them this endgame for today, is to let them see that there are these practical skills around calculation that are super cool and important for deciding your endgame results. There are endgames that are going to be really based on your calculation skills at the end of the game. Oh my goodness. Somebody in chat pointed out a move that I hadn't yet considered. Queen takes b7 here. Holy moly, that's a genius move. Is Blood Queen looking at that? That move really clearly decides the game. But it had not occurred to me yet. And, you know, even less so maybe with a minute on my clock. Could I see this move? Well, now I don't know, now that somebody told me. But, folks in chat, do you see the point of this move? Or people watching this video one day later? You queen b7, rook b7, then the rook's blocked by its own king. Right? And the g-pawn just comes down the board. And it's just a clear, easy conversion. Amazing move. Amazing move. So we got queen g2 check. King can go to like a3 or b3 at this point. a3 maybe gives black slightly less choices because king b3 gives black the square d5 for check, right? And the queen's better centralized. Also, if you notice this queen b7 move, well, king a3 steps out of the way of queen b7, right? Because then your rook has access to the b file. So sometimes you make a move and your opponent makes a move and suddenly you both notice, you know, queen b7 or something, and then once you've seen that theme, then you want to play king a3 or I guess king c3 rather than staying on the b file perhaps. All right, getting checked on that light square. So something like king to the fourth rank, she was going to be afraid of queen f4, right? So she moves backwards. Yes, and in fact, I'm going to show a key variation real quick here. Just going to put it on the board real quick. Queen f4. The king to b4 allows the rook to save itself, right? But then black has queen b8, basically catching this pawn, right? And that's the end of any chance of the rook beating or drawing or whatever, you know, competing with the queen in an endgame rook versus queen, right? So, yeah, so in the game, she comes back to the second rank, and that queen is moving into better territory now, right? Now there are queen e5 checks to watch out for, so our available squares for the white king are dwindling, and it's also possible that black could win an endgame at this point with g2, b8 equals queen, and then g1, because white doesn't have any check at the moment, right? So black has multiple ways to win here, yeah. This is clear at this point, but Anushka was being careful. You see she was really using her time, which is something I really like to do if I'm in a position that's almost certainly winning in the endgame, is like really use my time, just double check some things, don't get surprised by a shock tactic from the other side. Whereas sometimes, if it's really complicated and you think you might be losing, you might sometimes play some moves that feel like you have to try them, but you might try and play them quickly to put more pressure on your opponent, on their clock, increase the chances of them blundering. You've got less to lose because your position's already lost, so spending a lot of time just gives your opponent more time to see how to beat you. Exceptions, of course. I mean, sometimes you want to use your time in a bad position as well. All right, and we get queening and queening. Queen B1 was set up. Oh my god, she doesn't even queen the second pawn. Knockout. Everybody agrees.
Hello.
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 Okay, so our longest game yet. Made it just past move 15. How do you feel about that game?
I think the King G7 thing is good because it gets out of all of the tempo stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, we used the king so little, and you mentioned it, and then you tried it out immediately. King G7. So what tempo things are you getting out of? Like 8th rank checks?
Yeah, promoting with check, or check with the rook and then promote, or all sorts of things.
All right. So here, folks, if she hadn't played King G7, Rook D8 would be a winning move. Instead, the white rook has to go to C3. And then this position was pretty bonkers, this race. Rachel, do you feel like pushing the pawn quickly to C7 didn't work out here, or would it be worth trying again?
I mean, it definitely didn't work out here. Maybe there's like some kind of slight tweak to be made. I'm not exactly sure. Yeah, I don't know, honestly.
Yeah, I thought there's one complicated move to consider, which was at move 10 for white, so after rook to c1, g3. Instead of playing b7, rook takes c7, which seems winning for black, you could play king b2 first.
Yeah.
With the idea of g2, b7. Oh, but maybe I'd miscalculated this line too, right? Rook takes.
I thought that they were just like, or she was just gonna promote like.
Right, she queens twice. I'd miscalculated that your rook would be on c8 and you'd have an attack with rook g8 check. So the line I saw during the game was wrong. You can probably just make 2 queens and black should win. Yeah.
After b7, is it rook takes c7? That's better.
After b7 in the game, you played rook takes c7, yeah? And you won.
Or even like after king b2.
King b2, g2, b7. Yes, it's again rook takes c7. Just so you'll get 2 queens against queen and rook.
Okay, yeah.
And yeah. That looks winning. So if I played that game and analyzed that, like 1 minute of that critical variation there, I would basically say the c6, c7 thing didn't work. And and I'm just showing you how I learn from this. You go at your own pace, but like at this point I'd be like, oh, I'm trying something other than c5, c6, c7, like running the pawn way ahead of the others.
Yeah.
All right. How's it going? More blood?
Yeah, I'm trying to stay awake, honestly.
Okay.
But yeah.
Fair enough. You look like you're still very alert and doing well, but you're hiding the pain, huh?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
A little bit, yeah.
You want to do
You
one
can
more
try
and then
anytime.
we'll wrap it up?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm good with that.
Sounds good.
I'll show you my attempt at playing this position after.
Okay.
Awesome. Yeah, and I don't know if you have anything to say on like 3 pawns versus a rook too. I feel like that's super interesting.
Okay, if one side just had pawns and one side just had the rook.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll think about it.
There was also one of Sarah's videos, like at some point, I don't even remember, one of her older ones. She had a position kind of like this, where there were like some minors on the board, but there was this like rook threatening the back rank thing, and the move in her game was b4, because after the rook check, the king can go to b2, and there's no like rook c1 or rook a1.
Mm-hmm.
So as soon as I saw this position, I thought of that, and I was like expecting to play white, and I was like, oh, I would play b4.
Mm-hmm.
But then, yeah, I don't have white. And
it's a crazy hard choice on the first couple moves. Like, should you run A, B, or C for
Yeah,
white?
no
Should
idea.
you run like G or H for black? But I like that you didn't kill yourselves trying to solve it. You just try something and then play another game. So,
Yeah.
All right. So let's go one last game.
okay.
Wait, sorry, Nusha, could you just say again what you meant with the b4, or what Sarah said about b4?
Yeah, I mean, the position was different, so it was like more relevant. That I think like black didn't have as many pawns, but like, black maybe had like a piece or something, like a knight. But the move in her game was to play b4, because after rook e1 check, the king can go to b2, and it's stopping rook c1 and rook a1, and obviously the rook can't get behind the pawn this way, so the b pawn just goes. Like, obviously it's different here because like I don't have to go for the check because I can just push my own pawns, but
Yeah.
that was
Okay.
that was a concept that I thought was cool.
Yeah, that's nice. Okay. Maybe I'll push the b pawn this time. I have no rationale really for pushing any of the pawns. I was like, okay, if I push the a pawn, then like somehow there's f3 g. Like if you push the h pawn, then there's some kind of whoever went. I don't know. Maybe
Also,
I'll just try a new pawn.
psychologically, it's like the same for me to have a pawn on h7 and h6, because like I could play h5 in one move, and that's the move that I'm playing, but it like feels worse for me pushing a pawn from h6 to h5, so I like feel like black is worse because I want to go h5 and g6, or like g5 and h5.
That's right. Like in the starting position, your pawns are the same distance from queening, but the black pawn on h6 kind of biases you not to play h5, whereas with white, you might play a4 on your first move. That's what Rachel tried the first game, right? Might be your instinct, like, I'll play the furthest outside pass pawn from their king, and then your pawn's on h6. You're like, oh, I better move one of the other ones that's behind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. We rematch?
Yeah.
Okay, bye.
All right. It's now Racha's, German for revenge, Racha's chance at revenge here to even up the match 2-2. If she can get the fourth game. I'm not seeing the game started just yet, so I'm going to click over here and see if I can find it. Yeah, it just didn't start at that time for me. Okay, so let's see how they started. So this game, they're trying b4 on the first move, which is flexible about which pawn joins it and creates a little tuck space for the king, like what Anushka was talking about from another endgame. And she's settled into playing g5 every time for black on her first move. Here the b pawn runs ahead, so immediately, rook b8 has to be considered briefly. Anushka really likes how king g7 helped her last game, getting off of pawns queening with check, getting closer to her pawns to support them if needed. She's feeling very good about the usefulness of that little king move, even though she's not then rushing her king into the middle. It's not about activating the king. It's this like little king improvement with these side benefits that she's found. So a very subtle move. Yeah, very, very nice find for her. So the A pawn comes. So I would guess the next move from Rachel, probably A5. That's my feeling, that she's going to run one duo of pawns as far as she can. G4 from Anushka, and so then she'll follow with F5 or H5 probably. It would be very hard to harness a lot of time on the clock to make the first 2 or 3 moves better, Lipschitz. I think you have to make the first couple moves on instinct, and to make them on instinct, you need some kind of experience. I don't think the first few moves are moves that you can figure out by calculating or by having more time on the clock. I don't think it really helps you that much. Take 3 times. I don't think G5, King G7 looked bad to me. And, I think clearly white should have run the B pawn instead of continuing with the C pawn all alone, probably. If the B pawn were closer, then when you go C6, C7, and black plays rook C8, you want to be able to play B6 in one move and not spend a tempo moving your rook to C3. That was a tempo that seemed to have cost white in that game. So definitely, once the pawn was at C5, white should have played B4 instead of C6, C7. That's kind of the lesson we can draw from that last game. I don't think C4 on the first move is wrong for white, let's say. I think it's a fine move. It's what I played in the game that you will see at the end of this episode. Okay. Rook G3. Interesting. Sort of asking to get hit by some of these pawns here. That's an odd move to me from Rachel. I really wasn't expecting it. I really thought we were just going to see A5 here. Rook G3, H5. So basically, from black side, next I would want to play F5, so the pawn's defended twice, and I can get a tempo kicking the rook. Now, I have lost a tempo playing my third pawn, but all things equal, very good to have spent a move. Very good to have the pawn, because I'm going to regain the tempo when I attack the rook, right? So having my third pawn further up the board is almost always going to be a small advantage, even if it's not necessary. So now we get A5. And now black could consider something like rook E5, rook B8, but I think F5 should be good enough here. There is like a weird concept, rook E5, C4, rook E4 going after those pawns, but I don't quite believe it. Let's say I go A6, rook takes C4, A7, rook A4, B6. It's not worth capturing white's C pawn to bring white's A and B pawns to A7 and B6. So F5, that's the move I would go for on instinct at this point. We're right around the point in the game where I switch from instinct to calculation, by the way. If I was wondering about the conceptual thinking versus trying to come up with a better move. But like for black, I would still probably play F5 mainly on instinct here. Yeah. F5 does leave the king open to side check, so it's not. And I had thought of that as well, Andrew, when I said that, all else being equal, it's generally good to have the pawn further up the board. Why would it ever not be good to have the pawn further up the board? Well, exactly that. Sometimes some kind of checks against the king in some variation where both sides queen. So, yeah. So we get B6. Now we're going to get a tempo move. I would go with F4, not H4. Reason being, there might still be some line where the possibility of rook E1 is just an extra little tactical something. And the white king is so far away on B1, I don't think we need to be further away from the king. This is instinct. This is probably something I would have calculated, though. This is probably, we've just crossed the line. I would have played F5 on instinct or on concept, right? And here I would have maybe calculated between F4 and H4 for, she only had 2.5 minutes on the clock, maybe for a minute or a minute and a half. I don't know. You don't have a lot of time here. because she's been using about 30 seconds per move. I would ideally have played one or two of the other moves faster. So potentially I could have 4 or 5 minutes at this point and think for a few minutes about f4 versus h4. King g7, interestingly, Andrew, Anushka figured out that king g7 is not really a lost tempo because in almost every line your opponent queens at some point and then you're not in check. So in almost every race, it does not hurt you to have played king g7. It's crazy. It looks like a lost tempo in the race. But, like here, imagine f3, a6, f2, right? And then suddenly rook f1, rook check, and takes it, right? So it is something to have the king on that first rank still. You know, it's not the same for Rachel to have her king on b1 or b2 here, as she contemplates how to deal with this f-pawn coming in. Anushka continuing to sort of think 30 seconds on basically every move, and now she tries to defend the queen side. What? Crazy. Against b7, she's got rook b5 check and takes it. Against a6, she has rook b5 check and takes it. But, c4, rook takes a5, b7. And just on instinct, you know, and Rachel very low on time finds it, but just on instinct, you should not be doing this rook e5. You're looking so good in this race with f3, f2. You're coming so fast here. You got to believe in your speed. It looks like you're one step behind, right? Like you play f3, their pawns are already that far ahead, right? But you're actually arguably 2 steps ahead of white because their rook's going to get tempoed by f2 and their king's going to get tempoed by a check on the first rank. So you could say that when you play this move, you're 1.5 tempi ahead. 2 useful tempi and it's white's move. So you should definitely be looking aggressively for the win here. And when we get this close to queening the pawns, if someone's a full, you know, more than half a tempo ahead, if they're 1.5 tempi ahead, that's usually enough to be winning. That's how razor sharp these things are. So now she has to go for this f3 move, which would have been much better last move, clearly. Gaston says maybe rook to b8 here, trying to freeze the white pawns. I would only do that if f3 doesn't work. I would just calculate f3 like crazy. If it works, I play it. If it doesn't work, then I'll play rook b8. Nice freezing move, but you know, white plays c4, you do something, then white plays c5. It's only saving you 1 tempo, this rook b8, you know, so it's not helping you very much compared to this rook being able to get to e1. So she goes rook e5. Rachel under pressure finds c4 quickly, f3, and now she gets out of the way of f2 rook e1. She could also play b7 here, right? She's like very, very low on time, trying to make the final choices right here. She could have gone b7, f2, maybe rook to c1 instead of rook f1, right? So against rook e1, you simply queen. And that's where if the black rook were on e8, they wouldn't have to go for rook e1. They could just go g3, g2, and probably be ahead in the race. But here, b7, f2, rook c1 looks potentially equal. You know, it's not clear that black actually wins that. So Rachel gets off the first rank with the king, like the king g7 move. Now she's going to play rook f1, I imagine. She's very low on time. Still awake, fighting hard, rook f1. So what are we calculating? Like g3, b7? You guys see how unfortunate rook e5 was for Anushka in so many lines here, right? Oh, she just clearly didn't calculate that c4 tactic for white, and Rachel with less time but back against the wall, she just had to find it because everything was losing, and then she found it. And when I say then, I mean she found it quickly because she scanned through what wasn't working and just kept looking at every legal move she had there. Now it's possible for white to win because rook e5 to e8 is going to cost black 2 full tempi. And I would guess that black was winning if they played f3, f2 with the rook on e8, right? But a single tempo often doesn't just go from winning to drawing in these positions, but from winning to losing. So we'll see. We get g3. Black obviously still close. g3, let's say b7 is very likely. Then do you play g2 or do you go rook b8? Let's just calculate it straight ahead. b7, g2, b8 equals queen. Rook e2 check. Not pawn takes rook, queen takes e5, right? Rook e2 check. King moves. Pawn takes rook, queening. And then white's like searching for a perpetual, which I don't believe, with the black rook on e2 covering a fair number of squares. There's a chance, but I don't believe it fully. So g2 here, what would white do? They could go rook f2, g1 equals queen, queens. No, queen takes rook is with check. g2. Rook somewhere, queens. Sack a rook for one queen, queen, get mated by the queen and rook combo. Looks like g2 wins for Anushka here still. Even though we said, yes, she might lose off of this rook e5 t8, she might still be winning here. And she's putting all her time into this move. A very concrete calculation here. If I were to read Rachel's body language, she had seen this move coming and didn't have an answer for white. And, you know, had a little bit of the feeling of doom when the move came in. Has Anushka planned rook e2? Everybody's seen how difficult this is. We hopefully all have a sense of just how challenging this is. Yeah, Anushka saw it. They're both killers. Obviously, they're still working on their game like everybody, but they're both killers. So, yeah, so it's like white's just praying for perpetual here. The black queen can't really help the king or block any checks right now. But if the rook retreats, that could help. And the king also has the plan of kind of running up the board and getting near the pawn and queen. So it's not easy, but she's going to try and sort of cut the king off by being on this side of the king checking and not let the king get to these pieces. That looks like a good attempt. Again, a hard move to play off of principle. Ideally, you have a little bit of time to calculate it. Queen checks on the open board are one of the things that I'm the least good at calculating out of all kinds of chess variations. If you're asking me, Zoom Kerchu, black definitely had to take the rook on e1 versus queening on g1. I think it's a crazy idea that you could maybe not take that rook. So now if the king comes up, like queen f3, king e5, queen h5, getting rid of the pawn's control over g4, you know, king f4, queen f7, can the king ever get around? Yes, it could eventually get to like g1 or something and block with queen g2. But if white checks on g4, queen g2, queen takes rook, and you can always queen, yeah, Michael, you have to do some calculation and you have to, you know, move towards your pieces. We're trying to improve our pieces any chance we get so they come into, you know, blocking condition, right? So if you ever had the chance to move the rook, you would. If you ever had the chance to move the queen, you would. And you're trying to head towards here. And then you're just calculating little details like, can they check me here? Can they check me there? Here, probably you're going king g5 to not let white take this pawn off the board, right? Because king e5, queen h5, then that's just some square that you've lost. Queen d5 here, so I'm going to want to go like king f6, queen f3, come back to g5, I think. So, yeah, she repeats once. Now as white, you don't usually want to play a move like queen d6 because the rook can improve itself. There's still some hope. Now she goes my direction, king g5. Working hard. And Queen G3, cutting the king off from getting closer. Yeah. Oh, man. King here. There's Queen F4 just repeating on G3. And draw agreed. Incredible.
I'm not sure, but I think that's the draw.
I'm not sure either, but yeah, I didn't see the way out. That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's totally crazy. And somebody in chat was saying, you know, a couple moves before, should black have considered playing G1 queen instead of pawn takes rook? Do you know what I mean? A suggestion which seemed completely insane to me. Why would you not take your opponent's rook? But they're saying G1 queen, so you're covering some of these checks on the G file with your queen from the very beginning.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Insane.
You'd have to analyze for a while, but it's an insane suggestion.
Yeah. I was wondering if there was like a fork on my rook. Also, after rook e2 check, after king d3, I was like kind of scared that there was going to be a fork on the rook because then the king's attacking the rook also.
Right.
But, yeah. I don't know. I think there probably was some way. I had a feeling. Also, this whole this rook e5 move was just so bad. I threw so much of my advantage and momentum with that.
Yeah, it seemed like you were winning before rook e5, and then after rook e5, it's messy again. Like maybe winning, but you have to calculate absolute insane.
Yeah, which is a good concept to remember because I saw a c4 and I just didn't it didn't click in my brain. I think now that I've lost something because of it, it'll click in my brain.
Right. And that's part of the point of doing these sessions, folks, is if you've played something like rook e5 c4 once, whole different level of recognizing similar patterns in the future. As Anushka says, when you've lost something to a tactic, then you remember that tactic. You know, if somebody's played bishop h7 check against you in a game, now you're on the lookout.
Yeah.
So, have you figured out why I gave you this endgame? What was going on with this endgame?
No.
Is it because it's it comes out of a knight orf sometimes?
No, it was to have you work on your practical skills in calculating in the endgame, like this rook e5 c4 thing, right? Like these lines with g2, right? You had to make that choice to play g2 b8 queen, right? Let the opponent queen, right? Versus playing rook e8. This was another key moment a couple moves later, right? So f3, rook f1, g3, b7. Right here, you could go rook back to e8, or you could go for g2 like you did, right? Tricky calculations, right? And so we're letting you practice a bunch of really, really tough calculations with 1 or 2 minutes on your clock again and again in this endgame. The endgame is also a warning for you and everyone about what is complexity in chess, right? Because conceptually, the endgame is kind of simple. You're each trying to queen. It's also symmetrical, and so, you know, if I ask you what the evaluation is and you guess it's probably a draw, that's a pretty easy guess, right? But the crazy thing is, you could know it's a draw. You could have the computer eval. This is a position where having the computer eval might not help you even play the game that much, right? Because it's so... It always, every time it hits a point where the calculation is so difficult that you don't know what, you can't see your way through it, basically. And so, yeah, this single rook endgame with equal pawns is far more complicated, I think, than basically any other endgame I've given you so far, even endgames with, 4 pieces each.
Yeah.
And it forces you to calculate like crazy, and I wanted you both to know, because we've looked at endgames that were a little bit more kind of technical, so to speak, about posturing and putting pieces on good squares, and rook on the 7th, or centralize your king, or put your pawn on a square where it's safe and your opponent can't attack it, or fix one of your opponent's pawns somewhere where you can attack it, or stuff like that. It's been a lot more technical, and I wanted you to know, some endgames are just absolute calculation fests, right? Just just really taxing, and you just fought very, very hard in this endgame. Rachel, 3 hours later, 3 more time zones than us, so that's an extra challenge. But Sam Shanklin always told me when you're tired is a great time to practice endgames. Because in a game, when you get an endgame, you're going to be tired.
Yeah. Yeah,
So anyone out there trying to say like, oh, when should I do my opening study? When should I do my endgame study? When should I do my calculation? Endgame study at the end when you're tired could make sense in general.
Yeah.
Um,
Quick question.
Yeah.
Does it make a difference like with the black rook starting on the back rank
mhm.
versus like the white rook starting on the
Yeah.
third rank essentially? Because
Yeah.
that was something I noticed with the race was like I had to spend an extra move going back to the back rank while the black rook was already there.
Yeah.
So I had to bring at least if I wasn't bringing my rook to help, I had to bring 2 pawns to support the I was wondering if that made a difference at all in so maybe like I don't know, because it seems
sounds
like
like
it's
you
always
felt that
one
it
move
did,
difference.
right?
Yeah.
It sounds like you felt that it did. You would have rather had your rook on d1 in the starting position based on your 4 games of experience here?
Yeah, definitely based on the last game.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, how about you, Anushka? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree. I also think that actually having my pawn on... Well, no, I think it's the same either way. But yeah, having the rook on the back rank is definitely helps.
Yeah. So when I first set up this position, I thought like white would have a jump because they get to play the first move. And so it would just be like a little bit like black's on the defensive. But not by much, but by something, if somebody queens one move before you, that one move might really matter. And in general, this is a kind of endgame where every move matters. Like nobody's zugzwanging anybody or like wishing they could pass, right? So I thought it might just be like a tiny jump for white. But when I practiced this position, I discovered the rook on d3 was so much worse than a rook on the first rank that I actually think black is a smidge better. Like, of course, you guessed correctly, the game should be a draw, but if you play this a bunch of games in practice, I would expect the humans to win a little more often with black, because in human games, it's going to be blundered back and forth 6 times, which is another reason why at the very beginning I gave you that warning of like, be kind to yourselves, whoever loses the first game, because I didn't want to tell you you're going to blunder 6 times because that's like revealing a little too much, but I knew you're just going to blunder back and forth because I've tried it and I just blundered nonstop, like every move. And I sort of knew what to expect and still just blundering nonstop because it's just too difficult. And the first few moves are semi-innocuous, right? You could feel that. And then at some point you hit a moment where you're like, oh my God, every move I might win or lose or queen or get queened on or, oh my gosh. So I'd love to show you one game that I played here.
Okay.
So I have it. Where do I have it?
Should we make a classroom or join a classroom?
Yeah, let me try and grab it here. Is this the game? Yeah. Okay, so can I move it straight?
I guess
into a
one more thing I'll
classroom?
say about the last position, or I don't know if we already left it, then never mind.
No, we still have it.
I didn't know like if when I played Rook G3, my thought process was, you have to, if you want to make progress, you kind of have to defend the pawn with both pawns. But then you play like F4, H4, and then I had to move my rook away anyway.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that was like a, kind of a game coster a little bit.
Yes.
I don't know if I should have just played. Yeah, I think maybe just play Rook D1 and then, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know for sure, obviously, because you are talking to somebody who got basically every move wrong when I played this position myself.
Yeah.
But when I was watching, I thought Rook G3 probably loses to H5 or and F5, and I thought that if you played A5, that looked correct to me at this point.
Okay. It's really interesting because it's like we're kind of just doing exactly the same thing, and it's like exactly the same position. So and then it's like, how come it's that one tempo, and you move the king off so it's not a check. I don't know. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Okay, here's a cool detail in one of the more insane lines we've ever seen in chess. So remember this position at move 12 where somebody suggested maybe g1 queen instead of taking the rook?
Yeah.
To avoid... Oh, sorry, with rook e2 played first necessarily. Okay, yeah. So now g1 queen to stop queen g3 check. In that position, white has one of the weirdest / simplest moves. Queen a7 check. And she sees through to g1. So white will be able to play rook takes g1 and just take twice and win.
Jesus.
So g1
Wait,
queen...
Can we go again?
So g1 queen would literally lose basically in one move to queen a7 check.
It's such a cool move to find, though, in general.
It's...
Yeah.
All of
Insane.
these moves are so easy to blunder at a rate of,
Yeah.
30 to 60 seconds is about like the max you have on some of these calculations.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, it was, I don't know if it was a chess.com bug either, but yeah, like the whole time we couldn't use our full time. We just had like, I don't know, I think it was 30 seconds a move, which is fine too, but yeah, we couldn't get low on the clock to calculate all the way.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the best you could do, I think, I talked about this a little bit if you go back and listen to the recording at some point, but the best you could do, I think, is try and play some of your first 2 to 4 moves really quickly to get your time up to 3 or 4 minutes so that there will be a move later on where you can calculate for 2 or 3 minutes on one move if you really like hit a point where maybe it makes a difference. But on the first couple moves, it's incalculable. So you want to just hope your instinct's right. And play, a couple quick moves at first, push your pawns, I think. Okay, so I've got this game copied, and now I need to make a classroom. So let's go study, classroom, new room.
It feels like the meta in this endgame is just like leave the rook on the back rank, like maybe move the king up and then just push 2 pawns.
That idea that you had to spend 1 tempo on the king was crazy. I had not considered that. That was so cool. Okay, blind queen. Okay, so you should have invites pending to my classroom here. And so what I did was I practiced this against a computer. It would have been much better to practice it against somebody within 100 to 150 rating points of myself. And it would have been less dispiriting, among other things. But it's best to practice with someone close to you because you can tell when you're playing better or worse, depending whether you win or lose the game, because they'll be playing sort of around your level, making some mistakes as well. You'll see what it feels like to play against someone near your level, what your practical chances are, etc. It helps you calibrate everything for what you're most likely to face in tournaments. But when I picked this concept for you for this episode, I didn't have time anymore to find somebody who could practice with me. And so I just practiced it with the computer a few times. And, I'd love to say I could have done better if I played, with a 30-second increment. But I played several games rather quickly. And I think in truth, I would have lost 10 games in a row, even with quite a bit of time on the clock. So I'm just going to show you one of the games I played. So c4. The c-pawn has this slight advantage that if it gets to c7, there couldn't be rook d8 themes, right? So it's a slight advantage for the c-pawn compared to the a or b pawns. That said, we saw that if one pawn gets too far ahead of the others and your opponent attacks it with a rook, then sometimes you have to defend it with your rook, and that's a bad tempo for your rook. So there was a game that Rachel more or less lost because she had to play rook c3 at some point. Or that seemed to us like a decisive element in the game. So also I'll say in the starting position, I think running your king into the middle of the board for either player looks kind of pointless as long as your opponent's rook is on one of the open files. If your pawn gets close enough to queening that they start doing funny maneuvers with their rook, maybe keep in mind that your king could run across the board. But I wouldn't start by just centralizing the king versus running pawns like you both tended to do. So I start c4, b4, computer g5, h5, c5, h4. So the computer is running the pawn further away from my king versus what I was trying would have been maybe the f pawn, right? But I think up to this point, I haven't done anything terribly wrong. So we get here, here, here. Okay. Here I played rook d5, and I think that may have been the wrong move at that point. Oof. It's tricky, right? Because if I go b6, black's playing rook takes c6, and I calculated some line with king c2, h3, and the king just wasn't really helping. I don't know. Maybe rook d5 was okay. Let's see. f6 to stop rook g5. That makes sense. I go after that pawn. It's got to go to h3. King c2. I think here the computer said that a4 was better. Let's see what the computer does. This weird move. Trying to get the king to go to g7. The a-pawn runs. And the point of the a-pawn is to cover b6. It's not to run the a-pawn too far. It's to cover b6 so that if rook c6, b7, the rook can't deal with the pawn, right? So just a funny little use of that pawn, like when Rachel found c4 under time pressure in the last game, right? So the idea of bringing the a-pawn here. And now, very important, whoops, I thought b7 would be the move. There it is. Okay. So, yeah, b7 with the rook hanging is critical. And then you can come back around. King a2 exclam. Good lord, how is anyone ever supposed to find these moves? And now c7. And at this position, hard to calculate. You've faced a few things like this. But this would be, computer versus computer, better than how I played this line here. This is what I should have done. Now I'll show you what I did. In this position, I now played king c2, hoping to bring my king to sort of defend against these pawns now that the rook's moved off to the central file, right? I'm dreaming king on e4, f4. Maybe I can stop these pawns permanently now. But I did a couple variations with the computer afterwards, and it seemed like there was no situation where I could ever really stop these pawns. Like having my king in front of the pawns almost didn't help in any variation because the rook would switch to e8 and then there'd be sort of mating attacks against my king. So this move's not the right concept, and I followed it like this. And here was my last chance. I played king e3, which was not good. You can still hold this position as white with the bonkers move c7.
That's cute.
Yeah. We've got the rook h7 trick, which never stop your calculation at rook c7, rook h7, I win their rook, because black might win by queening the pawns, right?
Oh, yeah.
If you have time, you always have to calculate one or two moves past that, right? But like king g6 would maybe be a main line, and then you go b6. And that's the key. Your rook is just slowing their h-pawn. It's not really stopping it. No rook h4. We just go. And white has a draw here still. But I played king e3, thinking this concept, my king's going to come to f4. I'm going to hold these pawns off. But you see the king gets to g5 in time. And now I'm giving tempi to the pawn with my king. And they take the rook away from defending because now they're going to have basically mating threats against the king that's in the way of the pawns. By now I'm lost. And once I'm lost, I never get away, obviously, from the computer. So now I go with these pawns. I take here. I think I had some idea of like king g4, b6, king h3, b7, trying to queen on c8 with check. But after b6, they just don't take the rook. Check, and I'm mated by rook e1 and g1.
Jesus.
Yeah.
It's insane.
So
it's
it's
like kind of intuitive bringing the king in, but yeah, all the tempi.
Yeah, it was just brutal. And maybe if the king could get to f4 before the black king got to g5, maybe there is some position where you can hold them off a bit. But I can tell you I played like maybe 8 to 10 games very quickly against the computer, lost every single one. Somewhat expected because I knew there's going to be this incredible calculation burden. I was playing quickly. But just off instinct, there's nothing... You can't quite do it all off instinct, right? The first couple moves maybe, but eventually the calculation burden's extreme. Yeah, I mean, the computer could have won with either color a million times against a human. I also saw that there are some true difficulties for white. You know, like it is just like a little bit harder with that rook on d3. Just a little less obvious to play than if the rook were on d1. So that is my wrap-up for this endgame. So hopefully that's a little improvement on the format here, thanks to Jesse with the original format, and then of course somebody on YouTube telling me to bring that back. Any questions from YouTube before we wrap it?
No. It is
Yeah,
really
I
helpful
mean-
to look at something like this.
Yeah. It's just, yeah, I know with like engine lines, you know, even in the middle game, like at any point they play like a seemingly random or meaningless move, but it's actually just like, you know, calculated 35 moves down the line or whatever it is. This kind of feels like it a little bit, where it's like exactly the same position, and it seems like you just launch your pawns, and it's hard to see from the human mind of like, well, if you move that one instead of the other one, like 15 moves down the line, that actually works out a little bit better. And I feel like unless you know, calculate very far, it feels like a little bit like random or yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's like it's so nuanced that yeah, it's pretty insane.
Yeah. And I will say, like, more often in real games, it'll be like 2 pawns up on one side of the board instead of 3. So this is like a slightly extreme scenario I gave you, but it is reflective of like how these endgames feel, and I just wanted you to have practiced something like this, so if you get into a calculation heavy endgame, you have the confidence in yourself and your calculation skills, and also you like stay focused knowing that at any moment it can blow up in either direction, right? So there's no use in being like, oh, I'm losing, or oh, it's equal, or anything like that, right? You just stay focused for your chance so you can pounce on it. Because in an endgame like this, you're going to get multiple chances against a human from the losing side or the drawing side or whatever, you know? I have played a similar endgame once in an endgame training camp that I did, and it was like 3 pawns versus 2, so one side was actually winning, but I was able to win from both sides against a human opponent around my rating, which really shows just how like tactical and tempo it is, and it's not about counting pawns or whatever. So if you got into an endgame like the one we had here, but let's say on the starting position, one player were missing a pawn, but their 2 pawns were further advanced than the other player's 3 pawns, you can't assume who has the advantage or what the evaluation is.
Yeah.
It might be the person who's ahead in the race. It might be the person with the extra pawn. It's like very hard to tell, but a tempo can be a lot. And, you know, sometimes finding a moment where you can move your king diagonally, so it's both like defending its pawns and heading towards their pawns, or just like Anushka's idea, getting off the back rank so you're not going to get checked. And then you've got different options later. Little things can allow you to outplay people really hard in this kind of endgame.
And what advice would you give, like, you know, 3 pawns versus rook for each side? I mean, I would have no idea even how to.
Right. I mean, three
Like, does the rook
pawns.
go behind, or where does the rook even go?
Three pawns versus rook. It's going to depend where their king is, right? But if you can get your king into blockading position, the side with the rook, then you can win. If you can't get your king into blockading position, feels like very good chance that you'll eventually lose.
Okay.
Right? So there's no question that you want to spend tempi on your king whenever possible, right? You're not trying to do a fancy reposition of the rook or trying to race with your own pawns because you've got no pawns, right? So the question is, can you get your king in front of their pawns? Can their king block you out, or can the pawn's queen before your king gets there? But you're basically trying to rush your king there. If they try and block you out with their king, then you need to use the rook to help your king, right? By checking their king back or something like that. So I would start by just calculating any way to get your king in front of the three pawns, and only use rook maneuvers as needed to support that if the kings are facing off. Otherwise, I just leave my rook where it starts, more or less.
And then for the three pawns, where does the king go behind
So
the pawns, or
three
or
pawns. First, you could calculate if there's some just straight up promotion, right? Can you just get the pawns? Again, it's going to be a little bit like this in that, you want to think in terms of concepts, but the first thing you do is you just calculate a couple lines, right? And see, do the pawns queen or not if I just push them, right? Versus where do I want to position my king? If your pawns can't quite just straight up queen, then your main goal would be to oppose white's main goal, right? Which is getting their king in front of the pawns. So you're trying to keep your king blocking their pawns. That means you probably want to advance your H. Like, let's say white's king is coming from the queen side, like in the endgame we had today. You'd want to be advancing your H pawn, the pawn farthest from their king. And you'd want your king to be somewhere on, like, maybe the E or F file to shoulder their king away, right? Okay. So your F pawn is trailing to block checks from behind. And you're trying to advance the H pawn, I think.
That makes sense.
So something like, king F4, pawn F5, pawn G4, pawn H3. That's kind of like a...
Right. Okay, so like a diagonal pawn structures you can hide.
Yeah.
And also, like, hide from the rook, and then also kind of, but still have flexibility on the opposite color squares your pawns. Okay.
Yeah. And if your king is able to safely stay on the F file and white's king can't get under to F1, like, you're winning, I think.
Okay.
I know we did like the beginning of this together, but like there's a whole 2 chapters in the 100 Endgames book that's dedicated to rook versus... I'm doing the rook versus 1 pawn right now.
Mm-hmm.
There's also rook versus 2 pawns.
Yeah.
And I'm sure some of the concepts are like, it's all shouldering and like when to do lateral checks and stuff like that.
All right. Good work. Good work. That'll wrap up the episode. Thank you again, Anushka and Rachel. Thanks to everyone who accompanied us in chat. Some good questions. And how's training going? Feeling good?
Yeah, kind of just sprung up. I can't believe it's like next week. I don't know how that happened.
Yeah.
Everything in the future eventually comes to us and becomes the present.
Very wise. I'm trying not to take it so seriously anymore, and just like let myself have fun with the stuff, because I was getting kind of sick of like beating myself up over everything.
Yep.
I think I'm gonna stick to the King's Indian because I don't feel comfortable playing the Grunfeld yet classically.
Okay.
I don't think I have enough games like online with it or even just like looked at enough lines with it. But definitely starting to learn for at some point down the line.
Have you posted like the classic training game from week 3-ish? Is it something I should go check out on your profiles?
Oh,
to give
did
any
you
feedback
see
on?
that
or-
one?
I haven't seen it yet. I'm asking, is it up there? Should I go look for it? And
I think the PGN is up there, but I didn't comment on it,
okay,
so I still have to put my comments in. But
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
I don't know if Matt put his in.
sure. All right,
Yeah.
I'll have a look for you.
Cool.
All right, sounds good. Stay well rested.
Yes.
Keep your energy strong. Exercise, eat well.
Yes.
All the things. Anushka, are you gonna keep streaming or?
No, I'm going to sleep.
All right.
Who
Professional
should we
choices
read?
all around.
Let's see.
Yes.
I'm
yes.
definitely going. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. Poor Rachel, like, did this whole thing, and she's like, it's past midnight. Oh, I had one last thing that I wanted to say, which was the the biggest problem that I had in my game versus Matt was that I first of all just had no confidence, and I was like winning, and I was playing well, and there was no reason for me to be doubting myself. But every time I had a chance to like cash out into an end game, I would always like it's the same thing I always do. Where I was like, it's not good enough. Like I'm not winning enough in this end game.
Same thing, huh?
Yeah, and like literally just now, like just while we were doing this, I was like, this endgame was equal, and I was still happy to play an equal rook endgame because I like rook endgame. So why am I like talking myself out of cashing out into like any endgame
Right.
when like that's what I like playing anyway? Yeah.
That is what I've been trying to tell you. Hopefully it like echoes or resonates when you
I
say
think it
that to
finally, like,
yourself.
got
You're like,
him.
oh yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah.
Part of what I was trying to do with these endgame sensei sessions, right, was give you that confidence that you don't need that much to win, right?
Yeah.
Like you could actually win the game in the end game. You don't have to already be winning when you get to the end game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can finally understand it now.
All right.
People blunder all the time. Also,
Yeah.
I don't know the amount of games I've lost in classical. Like just grind. It's like intense battle for like 4 or 5 hours, and I just hang a pawn in the end game and lose. It's just like happens all the time. So.
Yeah. But even without a blunder, Anushka has a very strong case of like wanting to be like so completely winning, right? She always wants like a clear imbalance. She wants like no hope of a draw.
Yeah.
I
want to calculate mate before I trade into an end game, basically. And it's like, I like end games. Like why?
But she likes end games. She plays them well. She can win an end game with a small advantage. It doesn't have to already be winning. She can also win an end game that's equal, so yeah.
Good to keep in mind.
Awesome.
Okay. Should we find someone to raid?
Yeah.
Yeah. Doesn't look like very many people are on.
It's late.
One of those days.
Yeah. 6 a.m. in Europe,
See, do I know anyone?
It looks like Speed Chess 14 and Why So Serious are... Those are the chess people that I see.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I'll raid my friend Mark.
Okay, sure. I'll raid him too.
Oh, is that Why So Serious?
Yeah.
Yeah. How many Ys?
7 Ys.
Yeah.
7 Ys. It's the Smith Mora guy.
Yep. Yep. And a Nightdorf player.
Ah, beast.
It says his settings do not allow me to raid at this time. Did I just input it wrong?
I don't know.
Mine are allowing me.
7 Ys? 1,
Yeah.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
I also just copied it. Walker, I cannot keep streaming. I have a job.
Yeah, it says